All right, and I'd invite you to take your Bible and go with me to the book of Proverbs chapter 18. Proverbs chapter 18, we'll be picking up in verse number 20. I think I've said the last several weeks, maybe Lord willing, we'll finish the chapter. I'm not even going to make that claim this evening, but I can almost guarantee it will be done in 5 weeks, bare minimum, right? If that's the way it goes. I don't predict that to be the case, but that is the worst case scenario here. And so I'm looking forward to what we have for us tonight. Just real quickly, by way of review, backing up a couple of weeks ago, we began in verse number 15 and spent a few minutes just talking about how your desire is oftentimes going to be inextricably linked to what you get in your life. And it all starts on the inside. You don't become prudent, you don't become wise without a desire for it on the inside. And while some things are difficult to control, you can control what you want, right? You can control, maybe be more specific, you can control what you seek after. You can control what you pursue. I think verse number 15 talks about your heart and your ear. There's internal aspects of wisdom and prudence that we can dictate. We then moved to verse number 16 and basically just talked about the fact that money talks, right? That's just kind of the fact of life. In this specific context, I don't know that he's really arguing for a pro or a con, just kind of acknowledging the fact that, money makes a difference in life. And at least we need to be aware of that. I would simply give you the one caution of it talks about how, I'm paraphrasing, it's here in Proverbs, but how a gift perverteth the judgment of the wise, right? And to where money definitely can have a negative aspect of it. We then looked at verse number 17, and at least in my head, really kind of tied it back to the idea of verse number 13, he that answereth a matter before he heareth it. Just the concept of, if you've only heard one side of a story, it always sounds right? It's very easy to make a plausible sounding story if there's nobody there pushing you on it, nobody there questioning you on it. I watched a video earlier today at work. I watched police body cams, and they had been called to Walmart because a lady had been caught stealing, and she was a sergeant investigator for another department in uniform, a patrol call outside, and they talked to her, giving her a lot of professional courtesy, right? Okay, and she kind of gave a story. Oh, I just got distracted, I got confused, I was flustered, it's not what it seemed, it was an accident. And then they went and watched the video. Like, no, that was no accident, right? And then they went back and found her doing it 3 other times, right? But if you just listen to her story, I lost my keys, I was flustered, I tried to get out, sounded perfectly legitimate, sounded perfectly fine, until somebody else had something to say. In that case, it was a video, right? So be careful, number one, I'd say be careful about just accepting at face value the first side of a story you hear. There's always 2 sides, and maybe the first side is right, but the first side always sounds right when there's nothing to contradict it. Then we also looked at verse number 18, and just about the fact that when you're kind of drawing lots and things of that nature, you can't really complain about the outcome. Talked about Achan, right? Achan, about how they threw like 4 or 5 series of lots, and you couldn't get to Achan and be like, oh, it wasn't me. I'm like, no, pretty sure it's you, right? Just because there's no human intervention that can indicate or dictate outcome. And then we talked about number 19 very quickly, just how you get on the wrong side of somebody that's closer to you, and just creating difficulties in your life that are a lot bigger and harder to deal with than people that aren't close to you. It matters how we treat people that are close to us, because there's a lot deeper and longer lasting ramification always. That brings us to verse number 20, where we're picking up tonight. We're going to be looking at 20 and 21 kind of combined. We'll read them together, and I think that will make sense as to why. Proverbs 18:20 says, a man's belly shall be satisfied with the fruit of his mouth, and with the increase of his lips shall he be filled. Verse 21, death and life are in the power of the tongue, and they that love it shall eat the fruit thereof. I would point out that we're talking about a subject again, right? We've spread this Proverbs out over well over a year at this point, probably a year and a half. But I don't think that number one, we're so disconnected from the greater narrative that we're so unfamiliar with the wider book that you read this and be like, well, this is an interesting subject that he would bring up, right? This is an oft recurring thing. And I would reiterate, with the redundancy that Proverbs has built into it, there's probably a reason he keeps talking about your mouth. There's probably a reason that he keeps talking about your word. Most people, let me phrase it like this. All people will struggle sometimes. Most people will struggle a lot of the time, right? And there may be a very few people that struggle rarely, but all of us are going to have to deal with this. And so in verse number 20 and 21, he's creating a picture for us. Look at 21 again. A man's belly shall be satisfied with the fruit of his mouth, with the increase of his lips shall he be filled. Let me give you a couple of points here before we move on. Number one, words create an environment that you must live in. Right? Let me say that again. Words create an environment that you must live in. And we could give an example. It wouldn't quite have the same effect because you would know it. But if I spoke harshly to someone in your presence, like my wife said something or whatever, and I snapped at her in front of all of you, what do you think that would do to the feeling of the room? Right? Number one, I'm never going to say I've never said anything to Heather in public that maybe I shouldn't have. I've been married quite a while at this point, so I'm not going to rule that out. But I don't make a habit of that. I'll wait till we get home, right? If I've got something I need to say generally. But if I just told her something in front of everybody, you know how it would go. We get really quiet, really awkward, and that's the essence of being satisfied with the fruit of your mouth. And when it uses the word satisfied, I think it's easy to read that in a positive, but it's more just the idea of being full, right? Like there's an inclination. So harsh words create tension. I got on a Teams call this morning and somebody was unhappy on the other end of it. It was quite obvious at the outside of it. And it's like, well, this is going to be a fun 45 minutes, right? Because it brings tension into it, right? Lying, if you ever been lied to? Does that not create an atmosphere and environment of suspicion? Slanderous words create division. On the positive, faithful words create trust. Wise words create stability. Gracious words create peace. You ever been in a situation and somebody says something and you're like, oh, this is about to get interesting. And then somebody defuses it. And you're like, oh, well, I was wanting to see how that was about to, right? And so all this does is say the words that we're speaking, they're building an environment around us. Your words build an environment, and you can't always control other words, right? Sometimes people say things to you, in front of you. You know, it's like I say something harsh to my wife in public. Pastor didn't have anything to do with it, but he's still in the environment, right? He's still experiencing the awkwardness. And so I want us to understand that the environment we create is not just me. It's an environment that everybody around me is also having to experience. But you are having to live in the atmosphere you help create. When Solomon talks about here, and I alluded to it, but let me bear down on it, that the belly shall be satisfied. It's not just that words have external consequences. It's that man is filled by the very product of his mouth. And I want to reiterate this right here. This idea of satisfaction is not a positive all the time. It's just the idea of being full. I remember it'd be like we were going to somebody's house years ago at this point, and I gave the girls were younger, I gave them the riot act, right? We go in there, whatever they put on the table, you're going to eat it, and you're going to like it, you're going to say thank you, and all this, that, and the other, and then we get in there, and it's like the meal I hate worse than anything in the world, and I could feel them all looking at me like, and we're going to sit there, we're going to eat it, we're going to like it, right? And so I'm an adult, socially mature person that can read a room. I sit there and ate it, and so when I got done, I was full. I was satisfied, but I sure didn't like any of the time it was going on. And your words, especially negative, they can do that to you. It's like they're filling you up, and you're feeling sick the entire time it's there. You're being filled with the product of your mouth. And earlier in Proverbs 18, it was probably 2 years ago when we were in Proverbs chapter 18, verse 6. But it gives us two examples of that. A fool's lips enter into contention, and his mouth calleth for strokes. Like, and all you have to do is you're in an interaction or you've seen something happen, and it's like you may even think you're just asking to get hit by somebody, right? Like it's like you're never saying hit me, but it's like you keep talking like that, and that's going to be what happens. Calling for strokes. In verse 7, and his mouth, a fool's mouth is his destruction. His lips are the snare of his soul, right? So there's a negative aspect to this. It's filling you up. It's literally cooking a meal that you're about to have to eat, and your words are do that. So words create an environment. Words return as consequences. It talks about with the increase of his lips shall he be filled. This idea of tasting, right? It carries this idea of tasting. A man says something and later he has to taste it again in another form. You ever had to eat your own, we use that phrase, you had to eat my words, right? You have to eat and I've never ate my words and they tasted good, right? It's never, even when you're like, you're in that prime position to be able to tell somebody, I told you so. Does that even feel that good, really? Because it's always like a negative, right? Like, it's not like, I told you were going to win the lottery, right? It's rarely like that. It's like, I told you were going to lose, right? It doesn't even feel good, but we're having to eat the words. And think about it. You lie to somebody, you taste mistrust. You flatter, you taste shallowness. You gossip, and then you find yourself with no friends. You mock, and then you have resentment towards you, right? And so every word that comes out of your mouth, number one, taste it. You're like, what does it taste like? And not so much when you say it, what is it going to taste like when I'm having to eat it later, right? That's, I think, really what this picture is driving to. These verses are driving to here. It's a moral cause and effect in our life. Proverbs 12 says it like this: a man shall be satisfied with good by the fruit of his mouth. Proverbs 13:2 says a man shall eat good by the fruit of his mouth. So often this idea of not just your words matter, but it's like you're producing something. They're fruit bearing, right? Verse number 21, or as we move to that, death and life are in the power of the tongue. Again, it's just a reiteration of the power here. I don't think all of y'all look old enough to agree with that statement, not just because the Bible says it, but by experiential life, right? Yes, words have an effect. My guess is I don't want to go too far, but can you remember the meanest thing that anybody ever said to you, right? It's probably, I have a few things that are in the top 3, right? We remember those things, and if you sit around and think about them, there's a negative aspect that we can continue to feel. But then at the end of 21, it talks about, and they that love it shall eat the fruit thereof. You're like, well, the fruit of what? Well, the fruit of death or the fruit of life, right? You're going to get the fruit no matter what. That's like if you grow a lime tree, you get limes. If you grow an avocado tree, you get avocados, right? You're going to get the fruit of whatever you put into it. So when it says death and life, you get the fruit thereof. If you sow death, you're going to get death as a result. If you sow life, you're going to have life come back. You're going to eat the fruit of it. That's why, so let me kind of bear down on this issue. Words aren't merely sound. They're producing something in your life. And really this ought to take away the common excuses like, well, I was just talking. No, you were planting something. You were cultivating something. You were creating an environment. I was just venting. I didn't mean anything by it. I was only telling what I heard. I was just joking. Proverbs says those aren't acceptable. All these terms we use to dismiss the importance of what we are saying, Proverbs says, nah, you're bearing fruit. And we all, even if you don't have a garden, I look around, probably y'all are competent enough to know what gardens do. You plant something and you get what you planted. Now, there may be times, we joked with Heather. Heather does this all the time. I don't even remember planting that. Well, you did, right? Like there's no doubt about what you planted, and I know what you planted based on what? What it produced. It always produces in kind. God doesn't forget these types. But death and life are in the power of, they that love it shall eat the fruit thereof. Death, tasting speech, lying, gossip, accusing, foolish counsel, heresy, cruelty, manipulation, rash vows, angry exaggeration, corrupt judgment. Life-tasting speech is truth, wise counsel, gospel preaching, rebuke given rightly, comfort, reconciliation, prayer. Right? We all know what good words and bad words are. The question is when we're going through life, if we're not careful, we just literally spitting words out, right? Just spitting words out, what I feel like, what somebody antagonized me, somebody prompted me, if you wouldn't have done that, and it's always somebody else's, but all I'm saying Because there's death and life in your tongue, and it matters what you have to say. Look at verse number 22 with me. Whoso findeth a wife findeth a good thing, and obtaineth favor of the Lord. Whoso findeth a wife findeth a good thing. Well, so here's the first question I ask myself, like all the time, right? Like I feel like we've made a pretty bold statement here that I've got some questions about, right? And so I think that there's a way to understand this that kind of fits more neatly into our theology, right? I think that you can't read this verse in isolation from the rest of the book. Does that make sense? And so, he that findeth a wife findeth a good thing. That is an accurate statement, but it's not a complete statement. Does that make sense? I think the main point here, before we look at some things, is the institution of marriage is good. Full stop. Right? This is a good thing. But the kind of wife you have matters too, right? Like there's nobody that can deny that. And I would argue Proverbs 18:22 praises the gift of a good wife. This is a good thing. The rest of Proverbs warns you not to marry a fool, right? So we have to take this in conjunction with everything else. Have you ever thought about the fact, why is a wife, how does it put it? Whoso findeth a wife findeth a good thing. Why is this the case? You know what the first not good in the Bible was? Not sin. That was definitely a not good thing, but that's not the first time the phrase not good was used. It was being alone. Before sin had even entered into the world, every time I say that, it's like, well, depending on what Satan was doing in heaven. But, just from a Genesis 1, 2, 3 standpoint, before sin had entered into the world, God came down and saw something and said, this is a net negative on what I've created. And man is alone. So there is companionship. And that, I think, the important thing, Genesis 2:18, let me give you the verse. You're familiar with it. And the Lord God said, it is not good that man should be alone, right? This is not a good thing. And any man that's been alone knows that's not been a good thing. And any woman that's married a man that's been alone, like, that was not a good thing for him, right? Like a life leaves, like, well, that was not good for any of us, right? So we could all understand that. Buddy was just talking about how when his wife leaves, he starves himself to death, basically, right? He's like, I said, and I quote, I can't be bothered to cook, right? And hey man, I get it. Heather, when Heather goes out of town, be like, you better make it simple. If you want me to eat, it better be simple, because I'm just not doing an awful lot, right? And we can't be left unsupervised a lot of times. That's why guys are pretty bad about that. But I want us to, even in that context, understand this. Your wife is not your domestic household help. It's greater than that. She is present. She ought to be present. She's sharing your life in the ordinary, repetitive, private parts of existence where nobody else really lives with you. A wife is a good thing because man was not made to be a solitary creature. Women help in this situation, and it's a few and far man indeed that doesn't need that in his life. It doesn't need that. And if you can find that, it's good. And this idea of having to find it means that they're not on every corner, right? They could be difficult to find. It also means help fitted to the man. The word in Genesis 2:18, I know that y'all all know this, but here we are. I want to reiterate it. A help meet for him. It's this idea of suitable, right? And it doesn't mean she's your assistant. It means it's a help suitable, corresponding, fitted to you. And really what women ought to do for us guys is she ought to strengthen what's weak about us. She ought to see the things that we're missing, steady what we overdrive, supplies what we lack, complements rather than duplicates, right? This is a teamwork, right? I don't need somebody exactly like me. Listen, if your wife comes and says, hey, you should think about this, or I noticed this, or whatever, you should be like, this is a help suitable for me. And not just be quick to dismiss it because I'm the boss. That belies the issue. She is supposed to be helping you. In order for her to help you, you have to be able to accept help, right? And probably we all need more of it than there. Favor from the Lord. It's not just a social achievement. So I just want to get married, so I'm married. Well, good luck with that, right? Like it's more than that. Really, it's evidence of divine favor in the life of a man. I would iterate this here. Not every married man is happier than every single man, right? So, and I mean, I look around the room. All of y'all know, people that are unhappily married. right? Just going through the motions for whatever reason, it's cheaper, and all of those things. But this is an aspect of the life where there's components that us men need in our life. Paul talks about how singleness is honorable. There's nothing wrong with that, but there's a benefit to this here. And this is why, and I think the phraseology here is important. It doesn't say, whoso findeth a wife findeth a good thing and got really lucky in life. It's deeper and more spiritual than that. If you married right, and right, I don't, however you kind of define that, that's not you getting lucky. That's God showing favor upon your heart and upon your life and upon your soul. He's just Jensen's not getting lucky. So you can be a moral and emotional ballast. A man left to himself, again, I'm speaking in great general terms, can become hard, foolish, extreme, careless, self-important. A good wife ought to be able to check her husband without publicly humiliating him, right? Me and Heather agree. You don't talk to me in public like that, I will talk to you in public like that, right? A lot of this stuff should be done in private, but it's a good thing that she can do that. Wives ought to be able to warn their husbands before somebody else has to, right? Wives ought to tell the truth when flatterers won't. Wives can pull their husband back from foolish speech, foolish spending, foolish anger, foolish pride, and foolish discouragement. Wives are there to help with all of those things, and wives are there to play that part. That's a good thing for us, right? Listen, you ought to listen to your wife. And listen, we've been preaching on the family stuff. It's not to discount. Y'all know I don't discount who the head of the home is, but it's not like she's your servant and your slave either, right? There's a helping component that we need in our life. And wives are a good part of that. And in fact, listen, if you've been married very long, I think that you should have identified areas in your life that you should defer to your wife's judgment on, because you know that you're not sane, right? In those areas, right? Listen, when it comes to compassion and mercy and doing things for people, Heather gets to make the call on stuff like that, because I don't excel at that. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm saying that's not who I am as a person. And so, there's a relationship problem in a family, and Heather said, well, I think we should do that. And I'm like, well, I don't want to do that, which probably means it's not exactly what I should be doing, right? You ought to identify things in your life. Hey, my wife has more of the mind. It's not that she has more of the mind of God, but she's listening to the mind of God maybe more, right? And, very few times has Heather told me anything, I'm like, well, that's not right. I've thought oftentimes I don't like it, but it's not necessarily right. And wives ought to bring that into it, and women ought to be training their daughters to do that type of stuff too. It's not really something that caught. I got out of the car a couple of weeks ago. Hannah meets me outside most evenings when I get home, and I got out of the car and I had my calculator from work in my pocket, and she said, you should put your calculator in your car so you don't forget it. And I said, first of all, don't mother me. Second, that's a good point. Let me put that in the car before I forget, right? Hey, and you know what? And I said, yeah, that sounds like something if I got inside, Heather would have probably told me, right? She's like, you need to take your calculator back out to your car, otherwise you'll be texting me, did I leave my calculator on the table, right? Hey, it's a small, insignificant thing, but that's one thing that wives ought to be helping their husbands doing and cultivate. Listen, you want your husband to think you're a good in his life, right? And and the best way for your husband to think you're a good is to act like actually be a good, right? Like that ought to be a goal in your house, in your heart for a woman, and a man ought to be looking for a good wife, which probably means, especially the younger you are, the more you ought to be listening to people that are around you, because what may look like a good wife to you may be setting off alarm bells and red flags in people that have seen good wives and seen bad wives and experienced it on both sides, perhaps. Look at verse number 23 and 24. Think about how we interact with people. The poor useth entreaties, but the wicked answereth roughly. I was thinking about it. Has anybody ever? I'm gonna ask a question. I know the answer to it, but follow me down this train of thought. Has anybody ever asked you for money? Right? Under any circumstances, pulled up this evening everybody's coming in. I open the door. I was holding it open. They went in. Car pulls into the driveway. And I'm like, here we go, right? It's just like I got that complete. I've seen this before. And he get out and offered me food, right? He said he cooked for another church, had a lot of food left over. And I felt bad. I'm like, well, here I was all ready to say, no, we're not, right? And so I didn't take, if there's fried food upstairs, I'm just kidding, no, right? I didn't take any of it, right? But, we all know that. We've had people come up and ask us for money. You go up to a gas station, somebody says, hey, can I have $1 for a cup of coffee? Or you got a few dollars, I could, right? We've all been asked those type of things. I'm not going to say there's never been any exceptions. I just can't think of one in my own life. Without exception, I'm just going to use that phrase. Is that okay, right? Every time somebody's come up and asked me for that, the term I would use is they're using entreaties. Their body language, their tone of voice, their word choice is all spoken like a poor man asking at least from their perspective, a richer man for something, right? Think about it. If somebody comes and says, hey, boss, can I have $1? Or buy me a soda when you're inside. All right, that's one thing. And if you change the tone of voice and body language, let me give you an example. Let me have $1. Let me have $1. Well, then it goes from a poor using entreaties to armed robbery, right? Like that's the language, the phraseology. A poor man has to use entreaties, right? Because if he gets aggressive, well, now you're not a poor man using entreaties. I feel like I'm being molested and a crime is being committed upon me, right? Like, are you asking me for $1 or am I being commanded to give you $1? And if I don't, what, right? So, and there's a difference right there. Think about it. Your tone of voice makes a pretty big difference here. Let's make something up. Get behind on a credit card and see if entreaty is the term you would use when you're interacting with the credit card people. Like, please, can I have a few more days, right? And get really supplicant, really compliant, really apologetic. It's been a hard couple of months, right? Mercy, master, right? You ever had to go in and basically throw yourself upon the mercy of the court and ask for what? Like, listen, you could probably call a credit card and say, I don't know who y'all think y'all are, but you ain't getting nothing out of me. Well, that may work a time or two, but they probably have ways of escalating the situation, and somebody will be there and you'll be like, hey, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir, absolutely, right? Right? You understand? We understand this dynamic. Power matters. Status matters. That's why most people talk to their employees in ways they would never talk to their employer. That's why people talk to a coworker different than they would a client. That's why people talk to their children different than they do their spouse. If I smart off to my spouse, she may make my life miserable, or he may make my life miserable. Smart off to my kid, I'll just send them to their room if they don't like, right? Right? So all the way that you instruct matter. I would argue that this verse isn't an instruction, more an observation of the reality, right? He's not saying if you're poor, you should use entreaties. Poor people do, right? Like this is something that is innate in us. But I do think there's a lesson here. The nicer you are, the more likely you are to get what you want. The way that you approach the thing matters. I would argue that, remember, you are poor. Remember, have that attitude. I read Matthew Henry. He said this: poverty through many inconveniences. Let me restart that. Poverty, though many inconveniences to the body attendant, like, well, yeah, a little bit, right? Has often a good effect upon the spirit, for it makes men humble and submissive and mortifies their pride. It teaches them to use entreaties. When necessity forces men to beg, it tells them that they must not prescribe or demand, but they must take what is given them and be thankful. And it's like one of those things, like there's worse things in the world than being poor. And it's being poor and arrogant would be one of those things. We find a couple of examples of this in the Bible. Remember the story of Ruth. Ruth chapter 2, verse 7. You don't have to turn there. I have it. And she went up to Boaz and said, I'm going to glean in your field. I'm going to take whatever I want. That's not what Ruth did. In fact, it was, and she said, I pray you, let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves. Right? And then right? Because she was a poor person. She needed help. She needed assistance. You didn't go up to people and tell them you were gleaning. You went up and said, pray, Master, may I glean in the field, right? This is the attitude. Isaiah 66, this is kind of God's response to it. It says, saith the Lord, but to this man will I look, even to him that is of a poor and a contrite spirit and trembleth at my word. There's nothing wrong with being poor. That's who God likes to listen to. And then we have it on the other example, answering him roughly. You remember in Genesis chapter 42, when Joseph's brothers had come to him, it says, and Joseph saw his brethren and knew them, but made himself strange to them and spake roughly. It literally uses the exact same word. And spake roughly unto them. And he said unto them, whence come ye? And they said, from the land of Canaan to buy food. You know why Joseph could talk to him like that? Because they were standing there with their hands up and said, please, Master, a little bit of meal, a little bit of corn before we all die. Nabal in 1 Samuel chapter 25 says, who is David and who is this son of Jesse? There be many servants nowadays that break away every man from his master, right? And it's just a rough answering of what's going on. And I would argue that the point of this thing is how you approach people matters. And when we're talking to people and approaching people and dealing with people, we ought to do so with humility and sobriety in our lives. And look at, we're going to finish the chapter this week, verse number 24. A man that hath friends must show himself friendly, and there is a friend that sticketh closer than a brother. A man that hath friends must show himself friendly. I think the basic thought here is simple. Do not just complain that you don't have any friends. Be the kind of person that knows how to have a friend. It's not just something that's received, it's something that's practiced. How can we be friendly? I said, how can we be friendly? Right? You know, we've all met people like that. Some people, just friendly. I don't know. I don't really know it's like almost like an intangible, right? I don't know how to describe it, but I know it when I see it, right? Like that was a friendly person. And some people act, we got an engineer, and I don't know how to describe it, but he acts like he's everybody's grandpa. I like Joel, right? Like, I mean, man, we're going to go do a walk down with Joel. It's going to go to do a walk down with your grandpa. He's a little bit of an older man, and hey, he's just friendly, and it's like, you do realize I'm a contractor, right? Like, you're not supposed to be interacting, right? And we all, and that's the type of people we ought to be as Christians and people that love God. So how do we be friendly? Well, first off, take initiative. Don't always be the one that's waiting to be contacted. Call someone, check in with them, notice the absence, ask the extra question. Romans 12:10 talked about be kindly affectioned one toward another, right? It's saying, it's really, there's a sense in which it's not an option. Listen, people miss church, you ought to text them. You ought to give them a call. So I don't want to make it awkward. Well, be nice. I'm not saying it may be awkward on some level, but be nice. We're trying to be a friend, right? We're not trying, right? There may be a time and a place for other things, but let's be a friend. You can be dependable, right? Who needs a friend that doesn't ever show up when you need help, right? Friendship, it's not just talk. It's proven by showing up when showing up costs something, right? Not just present during easy times, but even present during hard times. That's a good friend. To be truthful without being flattering doesn't mean that you always have to say things that your friend likes, but I think, well, let me give you this verse. This probably sums it up. Yeah, it's definitely better. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, right? And ought to have cultivated friendship in your life where people can say something to you and if anybody else said that to me, right? I saw a meme or a reel and it said something. I know I love my wife because anybody else talked to me the way that she did, I'd be in jail, right? And that's the idea of being a friend. Like, if it was anybody other than my very bestest friend in the whole world that just told me that, I would not like you anymore. But how did Anna Green Gables, why do they call them bosom friends, right? It's like, you can say stuff to people, right? And you say, well, nobody ever talks to me and I don't really feel close to anybody. And this is your fault. Amen. The Bible doesn't say a man that hath friends is just around a lot of people that like him. It puts the onus completely upon you. A man that hath friends must show himself friendly. I have to be friendly. I have to do this. Be gracious with weakness. You ever had a friend disappoint you? Listen, if your standard is perfection, you'll have no friends. That's just the way it goes. Say, well, this church member this and that church member that. You've known them for 30 years and they said 3 things to you and you can't stand them anymore. Like, listen, one part of me saying, I'm not dismissing people saying things that they should, but what I'm saying is if you're sitting, we joke around like somebody does something, like, it's one less Christmas card we're sending this year, right? And you have a genuine attitude like that, and you won't send any Christmas cards. You won't have any friends. Like, it's not that all of your friends are perfect, but I always think about the fact, somebody's like, well, that wasn't a real good friend wouldn't have done that to me, but I can probably think back to times, probably if I was a good friend, I wouldn't have said that, or I wouldn't have responded like that. I wouldn't have had that attitude. If your standard is perfection, you will have no friends. Ephesians 4:32 puts it like this: be kind one to another. Man, just ought to work on being nicer to each other. Be kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another. That's how you maintain friendships. Well, the worst part of that is the fact that we're told that in Ephesians tells me that it's going to be hard to be nice to people sometimes. And we're not talking about lost coworkers here, right? What's the context? Somebody tell me what the context is. The church, the same church. Got to be kind to people, forgiving one another. I've never forgiven anybody for giving me money. I've only had to forgive people for doing things I did not like, that I did not find to be appropriate, that I did not find to be responsible human beings on their part. That's what we forgive. We sharpen instead of dull when we're a good friend. Iron sharpeneth iron, so a man sharpeneth the countenance of his friends. If your friend makes sinning easier, you have bad friends. And if you're making it easier for someone, you say, well, they're a church member. I'm kind of playing 2 sides of a fence here. All church members should not be your good friends all the time. I mean, especially probably the bigger a church gets, that could be much of an issue. Everybody here is probably, we're all right, right? We all be friends with each other. But you understand what I'm saying. Listen, I've seen kids in church do stuff like, y'all are horrible friends, right? Like, what are y'all, right? And so if you have a friend that pulls you to wrong, that's no good. And really the best way to be a friend is pointing people to God. I'm not talking about in salvation. I'm just talking about encouraging people and helping them be who they ought to be. And then very quickly there at the end, a man that hath friends must show himself friendly. I just ask you, really, this is the question you have to ask yourself: am I friendly? And if you start saying, well, when you say friendly, what, and you start doing a Bill Clinton level of depends on what friendly is, you're probably not as friendly as you should be, probably not as friendly as you could be. In fact, what I would challenge you to do is think of the most friendly person you go. Don't everybody think of me at the same time, right? But think of the most friendly person that you know in your entire life. Lost, saved, co-worker, whoever. And take the top 2 or 3. Like, this is a coworker, somebody I interact with, and they're super friendly. This is a brother in Christ, maybe in the church, just super friendly. Say, well, what makes them like that? And then emulate it. Emulate it. Say, this is what I find to be a friendly person. You know how to become a friendly person? Do friendly things, right? And so the best way is, I know what friendly looks like to me. I could do the same to other people. And at the end there, and there is a friend that sticketh closer than a brother. I know it's easy, and I'm not even saying completely inappropriate to run straight to Jesus with this one, right? There's definitely application, but that's probably not necessarily what he was immediately thinking of when he went here. And I find it to be probably more betterly interpreted, better interpreted with the concept of one good friend is better than many loose companions, right? I don't know that you can have 13 really good friends. I think that'd be unlikely. Either that or we need to talk about your definition of a friend, right? But whatever the case is. But I think it's more important. I don't need 38 friends. I just need a couple of friends, right? I need a couple of people that can actually go through life together with me and help each other out. Not help me out, help each other out. Otherwise, you're just if it's like that can go through life and help me out, that doesn't make you a friend. That makes you needing a sponsor to get through the hard areas of your life. That's not what it's about. It's helping each other as we go through life. And the Bible says that sometimes you find friends that stick closer than a brother. And, in some ways, like, well, that's not very hard. Yeah, but it's still painting a picture. Generally speaking, brothers stick pretty close. And he's saying you ought to look for friends that are even like that. I think we've been given some things to work on tonight. The words that we use, the kind of wife we're looking for, the kind of wife we're trying to be, the way that we talk to people, being friendly, just basic, practical stuff. Amen. Don't say things you ought not to say. Be the type of person you're supposed to be and be a friend. Amen. That's all you got to do, right? It's as simple as that. I appreciate your attention. Stand with me if you would. We'll have some prayer and be dismissed. Reassemble again Sunday morning at 9:45. I appreciate your attention and listening to me tonight. We'll have some prayer.